I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. I'm joined today by Dr. Shelby Harris, who I have stalked on Instagram for a very long time, and I'm incredibly excited that she's here to have a conversation with me today. Shelby is a sleep doctor. So she's a licensed clinical psychologist, practices in New York. Shelby, welcome to Women's Health Unplugged.
Thank you for having me, Jordan. I'm really happy to be here.
I don't even know how I found you, Shelby, and how I got connected with your content. But one of the things that I'm the most excited to talk about today is basically the complexity of sleep disorders in women and why, in my opinion, and I think also in your opinion, that behavioral medicine is actually the future of supporting people with insomnia. It's been so common in my clinical experience that people, they realize that nutrition is a bit of a process. They realize that so many aspects of their health are a bit of a work in progress. And then with sleep, when they come in with sleep disturbances, they're kind of like, well, what do you got for sleep?
Yeah.
Right? Like we're just going to give them a thing and that sleep will magically be solved. And yet maybe more than any area of medicine, sleep actually requires this very much behavioral work in progress kind of approach. Can you give us a bit of background on your life and training and how you got to this place in your career so that we can dive in on the conversation around behavioral sleep medicine?
Yeah. So I just as a kid, I was a big sleepwalker, believe it or not. So I was always like, I had to have the bottom bunk at sleepaway camp, and my parents had to have all these safety procedures in the house. So I tried to leave the house. So I was always fascinated that I had this other weird life that I didn't know about. That I was doing these things in my sleep. So sleep was always something that just interested me. But I never thought to do it as a career. And then I was always interested in being a psychologist. And when I took a year off between undergrad and grad school, I was put on a research study that went to addiction centers where people who were in early rehab for alcoholism, we were actually treating in the study their sleep. So what we found a lot of times is people would go back to using alcohol because their first symptom they had when they left rehab was that they weren't sleeping. So they started to use alcohol again. So this was a while ago, we were using a medication called trazodone in that study. And we were using medication. We found that in just a few weeks' time, if you improve someone's sleep, their risk of relapse dropped significantly. So that really got me thinking, if we can get someone sleeping to really help this aspect of the world, why aren't we focusing on it in so many other areas? So that's really where I kind of then tailored all my training and working at Montefiore Sleep Lab, and kind of have gone since then, really working in psychology, but with a very specific subspecialty in sleep medicine. And then with the women, I just, over the years, even before it became the trendy thing for everyone talking about women's health and perimenopause, I just noticed for the past 20 years that so many of my female patients were complaining about all these things. They were getting poo-pooed. Oh, that's part of aging. Don't worry about it. And there are really good treatments out there. So that's where I dedicated a lot of my life to.
That's so cool. It's funny. I was a sleepwalker. I've never talked about that but I was a big sleepwalker too. We used to joke that I would have to go away to summer camp being like, I'm in cabin B, right?
Yeah. My kids sleptwalk. It's a very hereditary thing too. Yeah.
So interesting. And so I would love to kind of dissect what we mean by behavioral sleep medicine a little bit, because I do think when I start talking about this with patients, and certainly this is not my domain expertise, but when I start to talk about what that would look like for them to be supported in that way, they're like, yeah, Jordan, go to bed at the same time, make sure you have a dark room, don't do your taxes in bed. I get it, sleep hygiene. But there's more to that conversation. And so I'd love if you could talk a little bit about what do we actually mean by behavioral sleep medicine?
So the idea of what behavioral sleep medicine, or BSM, is that is really a subspecialty within sleep medicine. So the MD kind of area where they're doing a lot of sleep studies, and they're doing medications for various things and apnea treatment. We're a subspecialty that really works on treating sleep issues without the use of medication. So sometimes we use certain supplements like melatonin, but very judiciously, light therapy, but it's very much about behavior change and cognitive change, thinking of how you think about sleep. Now, behavioral sleep medicine as a whole, people often think it's just insomnia. We actually, the people who are true specialists in it, like myself, who are board certified, we treat people who have apnea non-compliance issues with their masks, people with narcolepsy, sleepwalking, nightmares. It's all different areas of sleep medicine are very much improved from behavioral interventions. So we will sometimes work with physicians, MDs. Sometimes we're just a sole treatment ourselves. Now, when it comes to insomnia specifically, there's a treatment called cognitive behavior therapy for insomnia. Now, that's like a different, I mean, it's part of BSM, but there are a lot of people out there who just do CBT for insomnia and don't do all the other stuff like I do. And that is really, people talk about it and they'll say, oh, I do insomnia treatment, but really they're saying they do a sleep hygiene, which is just the limiting caffeine, limiting, alcohol, unwinding before bed. But that is really not an actual effective intervention for most people who have chronic insomnia. So what we do for CBTI is you just make sure you have the sleep hygiene in point, because nothing's going to work if you're drinking 3 bottles of soda at bedtime. But then we add in changing patients' bedtimes, wake times. Sometimes people, it's a very common sense issue that people get stuck in. If I can't sleep, I'm going to go to bed early. I'll sleep in the morning. I'm going to try and nap. I'm going to do all these things. That's the stuff that actually gets them in trouble. So we work on tailoring of specific later bedtime and sometimes earlier wake time. We change what they're doing in bed. We change how they think about sleep, if they're forcing sleep. And it's a very short-term treatment that doesn't use medication usually. Sometimes people are on meds and we'll complement it with that, but it's really a short-term treatment without meds. And it's the gold standard treatment by many medical societies, and including sleep medicine and the National Association of Menopause Specialists. Like they're now saying CBTI is the thing to do because it works just as well as meds for many people.
Yeah, which is so crazy because that's not like clinically, that's not my experience, right? Like I'm often that first person to say, hey, can we look at CBTI as a solution? And even patients' acceptance of that is like, well, that's something we do if everything else fails, then I'll talk to someone about my sleep, when it's not actually what the research suggests anymore, that we really shouldn't be using sleeping medication as the first line.
100%. Yeah. I always think of it as like a tiered approach. So it's not as easy to take a pill. And I think that's the problem with our society nowadays. And let's be real, advertising is really, they're not advertising me online, right? They're advertising all the beautiful medications that have these lovely names that are restful, right? But that's where the draw is, and people see it, and we have something that can, for many people, make them sleep, or not always sleep more. It just creates for some people an amnesia for the night. So it's just easier. CBTI is not easy, but when it works in the long run. And then we can then circumvent a lot of the problems that can happen with long-term sleep aid use, which we try to really not have to do if we don't have to do it initially.
And what does that mean, like changing the way that people think about their sleep? Like I've always been very curious about that. I think at like a very topical level, you can see, right, if everyone dreaded getting into bed, right? And they didn't have the confidence that they were going to sleep, you could maybe see how that would spiral, right? Especially in your kids, right? If your kids are like super worked up before bed, you can see it and be like, oh God, this is going to be a hard night. But I think there's a more subtle sort of thought process or conversation people are having in their head about sleep that probably is influencing their ability to fall and stay asleep.
Yeah, I think it's a very multifaceted sort of issue for a lot of people. There are those people with insomnia who will just say to me, I'm just so anxious. I can't stop worrying about anything and everything. And then when I start worrying about sleep, it just spirals and I'm tense and it doesn't happen. Then there are other people that just say that their brains are busy and they just can't really turn that volume down. So it's not really an anxiety issue. It's just they just can't quiet their brain. And then for other people, it's just they're timing everything wrong. So they're getting in bed at a time that's way too early when their body physically is not actually ready for sleep. So if we just have them go to bed later and we time it properly, it overrides their brain stuff and it's not even an issue because they fall asleep a lot faster. So there are different ways that we'll target the thoughts about it. Some people really worry about, they look at the clock and they say, if I don't get this much sleep tonight, or I have this many hours until I have to, they're doing mental math at night, they put more pressure on themselves and then that worsens it. So it's really very tailored to the person. Sometimes it's challenging the worries they have. Sometimes it's just meditation and recognizing your thoughts and learning to let them go. But that can be a big piece for some people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Because I think, when I'm working with patients, especially for women, they report that like, well, no, I'm not anxious, but I have a busy brain. And then turning that off doesn't feel like particularly accessible to them, right? And so how does that actually work? Like, are there strategies for people to like put down the busy brain, or is it really just about timing? And if you went to bed at the right time, then your brain would be ready to go to sleep?
Honestly, in 90% of my cases and patients, I start with just a restricted sleep-wake schedule that I tailor specifically to them based on how they've been sleeping, because it almost overrides it. People will just say, I'm too sleepy to even worry or think anymore. And it works. It really works for a lot of people. And it's sometimes just the simplest thing, so that if they can start getting more confident in their ability to fall asleep when they get in bed, then it takes that anxiety away in the long run. But for other people, no matter what they do, the other thing we'll do that some people will argue whether it works or not, there's some people when they get in bed, their brain just turns on and they'll be sleepy on the couch, but the bed just wakes them up. So we say, no worrying in bed. If you're there, the rule of thumb usually is about 20, 30 minutes, but I don't love that. I just say when you get in bed and you get frustrated or you just know that sleep's not happening, go sit somewhere else. And you start training your body that the bed is not a place to sleep. It's only sitting, or not a place to worry. Just go somewhere else and do something, and then get in bed when you're actually sleepy. And that can help too. And then there's a bunch of strategies, right? I add in, sometimes I do something called worry time with some people. I have them sit and literally get everything out before bed, an hour or two before, where they're worrying about anything and everything for 20 minutes. And then they have to learn to say to themselves, no, not now, during worry time every day. So you can worry, but you can only worry excessively during that 20 minutes. Sometimes it's journaling. Sometimes it's challenging the thoughts. Sometimes it's meditation. There's not, people always want like, what's the thing that I can do? I said, if it was that simple, everyone would be doing it. So it's really tailoring it. It's tailoring it to people, like it was like, what do you think of cherry juice? Like, well, everyone would be drinking it if it were that effective, right? So it's really about tailoring it to the person. And then I think the other thing I do a lot of is psychoeducation. So as much as I love the online world of all, where tech is going and all that sort of stuff, I think there's a lot of accounts out there that are not realistic, and they're all about optimizing everything. And they don't take into account that it is normal to have a bad night of sleep here and there. And that perfection 7 nights a week is actually part of the problem. And that people strive for that because they're tech or whatever time. And then that actually can make them put more pressure on themselves and make them worse. So a lot of education of what normal sleep is too can be very freeing for people.
I think that that's such a good point. And I've got so many questions about that and about wearables and whatnot. But it's interesting because I'll say to patients often, like, one is not a trend. Right? Like one is not a trend. Well, it's one night, but when we're trying to help people transition to something new or transition to, and they have this like hypervigilance around their symptoms, whatever it is, right? Whether it's their menstrual cycle or their hot flashes or what have you, that hypervigilance around like, like I had this symptom, I had this experience, I had this kind of day. We start to like, connect that we're sucking, that there's failure, that the treatment's not working. We should probably give up. We should try something different, because we've like associated that one experience or one night with, with the change that we made, right? So even if we recommend something that's like highly indicated, right, for a patient, like maybe melatonin is really indicated, but then on that night they have a particularly bad sleep. Right? They'll be like, the melatonin made it worse.
Right. Exactly. And I'll always say like, you've had insomnia for 20 years. We need to be patient. It's not going to just fix itself overnight. And also, even people who have really good response to a lot of, like you were saying, melatonin or any medication, it doesn't always work every single night perfectly. It's like, it's the trend, like you were saying. So I always like, let's aim for patterns, and also just educating people on like what the limits are for insomnia is very useful, right? So I'll say, 3 nights a week or more of trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or awakening too early. And it has to go on for at least a month for it to be short-term insomnia, and 3 months for it to be long-term. So like a week or two of it not working, it doesn't mean that you're in the chronic insomnia belt yet. So it's really about thinking about it that way instead of that perfection every single night.
I really like that. And I think, giving some of those like clear expectations about what to expect. But I'm curious about what you think about some of these wearable devices and things where people are like becoming maybe more connected to parts of their sleep than they were before. Like, do we think they're accurate at this point? I am like 8 days into an Aura ring here, so I'm like learning about what I think about it currently. But is that helpful? Like, is it actually changing anyone's sleep behavior? And this was my big question about this Aura ring. But also, is that maybe setting us up, right? Like for this idea around perfectionism?
Exactly. So I like the Aura ring. It's really popular where I am in New York. And I personally think it's pretty good for a lot of stuff. And like the Whoop band, like there's a lot of them out there. But they're good for certain people. So all that tech is really, in my opinion, it's better for people who don't necessarily, you're a little different, but for people who typically don't make sleep that much of a priority or are just curious, like, what can I do? Maybe I wake up tired. Does alcohol actually affect me? Let me see these things. That's where I think it's really good. And there's some people who actually it's not a sleep study. It's not even close to a sleep study, but some people have noticed that their oxygen dips a lot in the middle of the night. And then we can say, you know what, maybe you should get a sleep study because you might have some apnea or something. I think that's good. I was just at the Sleep Association meeting in June, and they had a whole thing about the wearables. And essentially the wearables that are like EEG kind of ones that are headbands tend to be more accurate with sleep staging, but most people aren't wearing them. They're usually doing like the ring or the watches. Those are less accurate so far when it comes to sleep staging. So take it with a grain of salt when it says deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep, all that sort of stuff. Those aren't as accurate, but I think they're really good just to bring insight to people. Now, that being said, if you are someone who has insomnia, they tend to not really, it's only suggesting sleep hygiene stuff. So it's not really changing because we know that that's not a good treatment for insomnia. And all it does is make people more hyper-focused on it. And then insomnia is a disorder of perception a lot of times. So if you think you slept well, but then your ring tells you it was terrible, are you going to now let your day go horrible because of rings data? And it actually worsens insomnia. And that's been documented a little bit in some of the research. And I find it anecdotally with my patients all the time. So I actually have them put all the tech to the side. I just want to know what they perceive as happening.
That's such a good point. Like, it's true. When you wake up in the morning and your ring is like, ooh, good luck.
Yep,
It's gonna suck. But it's
like, what were you saying?
No, I was gonna say it has that potential, right, to influence you versus you just being able to reflect and be like, okay, like, do I not feel as well? Do I like, what does that mean? Also, one is not a trend. And so it's just today. But I can see that, right, if you already have anxiety about sleep and you're worried that sleep is just something that doesn't feel that accessible to you. And now your device is being like, yeah, sister, I totally agree. That was a terrible night's sleep. That probably is going to influence the way that your future nights go.
Exactly. And then it'll say like, you didn't get enough REM sleep. And then people start obsessing about REM sleep. How do I get more REM sleep? I'm like, well, okay, there are certain things that are identifiable, like medications and alcohol, but you can't go to sleep and like will yourself to get REM sleep. Like there's things you could do, but it's not exactly teaching you to do those things. So it's just creating more anxiety over the problem a lot of the time. So really see if it's serving you or if it's making you more anxious. And that's kind of the dividing factor that I'll have for people.
That's so good. That's such a good point. One thing I did want to chat about a little bit is what daytime behaviors are influencing sleep at that basic level, and thinking a bit beyond the sleep hygiene piece.
Yeah.
I think one of the sort of misconceptions about sleep is that the sleep is happening in those 3 minutes, right? When you get into bed and you pull up the covers and you're like, okay, I'm ready. And people don't realize that, like, the way that your brain is moving towards sleep and all of those things are actually happening throughout your entire day, not just in those last 3 minutes when you pull the covers up and you say you're ready. And so it's common to not understand like how influential your day actually can be on that night's sleep. Like, what are the things that you find that people are the most surprised to hear that are influencing like the quality, depth, and like that recovery time overnight?
I think this one has caught on a lot on Instagram. I've seen it everywhere now, but it's something that we've been talking about in sleep field for years. It's like, just when you wake up in the morning, if you have a routine, like to keep a routine wake time is huge, because that really is what sets your body's rhythm. So I always say that the night starts with the morning. So if you keep the same morning wake time and get light, for the majority of people, you get light at that time, that is really what really helps to set the stage for the nighttime, because now you're going to start building up, we call it like a sleep drive. You're building up appetite for sleep the minute you get up, so that it makes it easier to sleep at night. That's one huge thing. The other thing is, a lot of people will say, oh, I don't use caffeine, or I use it, but it doesn't affect me. Caffeine's another surprising one, because what it does for some people is first of all, it can be dehydrating. So then people might drink more water or other things towards the evening, making them have to urinate more, but also it can worsen the quality of the sleep that you have. So even if you are drinking it and you still fall asleep fine, it might still impact the quality of your sleep. And then just movement, right? People, I think the pandemic touched so many of us, and reasons insomnia rates went through the roof for many reasons, stress included. But one of the big reasons, in my opinion, that people really struggled for a long time is their whole sleep-wake pattern shifted. We started working from home. People started sleeping later, not moving, right? Darkness, all those sorts of things. We are meant to move, to get light, to energize us. And if you're not doing that stuff, it's just going to make it harder to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love trying to explain, and I'd certainly, you do it better than I do, but like talking about that, like that sleep drive, right? Because that's not something, again, that's the thing that's like literally happening from the moment you wake up in the morning. And when you start to think about it that way, you can start to see how your daytime behaviors might be helping or hindering that whole process, right? Like you would never imagine that like the one meal that you ate right before bed was affecting your entire day's nutrition. Right? You would be like, no, there was like a whole bunch of other food that I had during the day. And yet for sleep, again, we often think about those last like 20 minutes before we hop into bed being the most influential, when it's the entire way that you conduct yourself through the entire day that actually will influence that sleep drive, which I find so fascinating.
It's really so true. Everyone thinks about sleep on just like an 8-hour or whatever window. And it's like, it's really 24 hours. You have a body clock that's on 24 hours a day, doing multiple different things. We need to just kind of set it. And also that there's dips during the day too. Right. So people just think that you're supposed to be awake and energetic all day long. Well, no, there's a reason that some countries have siestas. Like we actually have natural dips in our body clock that make us a little bit tired. And to know, like, if you're going to take a nap, is that going to be something that's going to influence you as an insomnia patient? Or is it something that you can use to benefit you because your circadian rhythm kind of takes a dip in the afternoon?
And I think, and I see it a lot in my industry, we've really pathologized some of that low energy later in the day, right? And you will see a lot of unique health hack kind of solutions to try and, do you have an afternoon crash? Well, you must be doing everything wrong. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hack thing really is what drives me like just mad a lot of the times, because it's not so simple. And there are dips in people's circadian rhythms, and it's normal to get sleepy at night. As long as if you're going to bed at 7 o'clock and waking up at 2 a.m, right, that's problematic for a lot of people. But if it's sleepiness that's impacting, or dips that are impacting multiple parts of your day, then we need to start talking. But to have a dip here or there, you're fine. You're fine. And to normalize that we're not robots that can keep going. And, and I think the light thing, it's like, it's have this temperature of water and, drink this and have this combination to increase your dopamine and then do that. Like, it's all these like crazy hacks that are out there that I just think really just make people, I don't know, they might work here and there, but if you're someone who's really struggling with your sleep, like you're just putting your eggs in that basket, and it's just going to be more demoralizing a lot of the times.
For sure. And I think, and one of the things we had said that we wanted to touch on was like how this sort of like, relentless pursuit of perfection in women's health probably isn't serving any of us. But when we pathologize some of those natural things that are happening to people, and the perfect example in my world is when women reach out and they're like, I'm spotting before my period. I'm like, that's okay. It's fine. But they've read thousands of Instagram accounts that, there's something wrong with their body if that's happening. And when we pathologize that like little dip in afternoon fatigue, suddenly we're picking apart their lunch and their insulin secretion and their adrenals and their cortisol is tanking. And it's like we're pathologizing, but we're pathologizing maybe what is just a normal dip in energy in the afternoon and selling them a solution.
Exactly. And it's not, I mean, yes, there are people who it really is an issue if you can't get through the day, but a lot of times we're not, like I said, we're not robots.
And so one of the things I wanted to touch on, and you had kind of mentioned this too, like is, we have this narrative of like putting sleep first in the world of just health and wellness. Actually, there's this real drive towards better recovery, put yourself first, sleep first, self-care, hashtag. And yet, right, I think there's a deeper sort of bigger picture conversation we need to have about what's happening in the lives of people and women when the narrative is that they need to sleep better or sleep more perfectly. And yet none of them have the support to actually make that happen. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's so challenging, right? So people will say to me all the time, well, you want me to have an hour of wind down time at night? I was like, I know, I get it. And if you can't find an hour, we're going to start with 5 minutes, right? The society is just not lending itself to giving support to women. It's a burnout method, right? So we're busy taking care of kids. And then there's this, like the whole revenge bedtime procrastination thing at night too, where people are just like, I don't want to make time for sleep, or I can't because I also need time for my own brain to decompress. So they procrastinate going to bed a lot of times because they just want time to actually decompress and relax and do the things that they want to do. And it's just, there's not enough support out there for people, for women especially. And you have demands at work. And now that we're really a 24/7 society, since the pandemic, especially people are working from home, there's no demarcation anymore. So we're just on 24/7, and good luck like trying to, say there was this video that was online that was saying that women need more sleep than men. And ideally they should be getting 9 to 10 hours where men can really only, deal fine with 6 to 7 or 8. And it was a man that was saying that. I was like, yeah, good luck telling most women, having them find 10 hours to sleep every single night, right? You can,
right. Well, then you do everything. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I was like, yeah, we really need to find realistic solutions. And to just say to someone, you're not getting enough sleep, you need to prioritize it. Fine, but how are you going to prioritize it? What can we do? What are some small steps? Whether it's asking for help, getting a sitter, doing what you can financially, or just aiming for 5 more minutes a day. Where can we find 5 more minutes that you can go to sleep? Like, it's really small steps instead of these overarching generalizations that I think are just setting people up for failure and making them feel terrible.
Yeah. And I think when we have, when we say to people like, well, you need to sleep 8 hours per night. And for them, that would be like, well, that's actually cutting into my ability to make food, or cut into the time that I would take care of my kids or get the laundry done, or I'm a single parent. And this is what that does, is paralyzes them where they are. Because if the goal is something that is so unachievable in this moment, then they do nothing. Right. And then the idea is like, well, I can't have that actually. But I also do think there's that bigger, more society conversation there around, like, especially women supporting women, right? Like, we have women in lots of leadership roles now that also can be part of the solution for helping other women get more sleep. And I kind of hopeful that becomes something that is possible, right? That in the future, but I do still see women leaders holding other women as hostage in their work environment and preventing them from having the opportunity for self-care and recovery.
100%. And it's interesting. I do a lot of corporate talks on sleep and sleep health, and where, if you feel like you're struggling, where can you get appropriate treatment? And it's a lot of like corporations, law firms, finance who want me to come. And I know that the backside of it is that there's still billable hours. There's still, have to meet certain amounts of criteria for working late at night and be up in the middle of the night to deal with various markets that are further away, that it's almost paying lip service to it. Like, you got to do it, but we're not going to set up the system necessarily. Now, there are some companies that are really changing that, which is wonderful, but it's very slow progress. And I hope that we can at least move even more in the right direction.
Because really, we're kind of talking about infrastructure, right? Like infrastructure in your day, in your life, in your health. And when we don't have that, or if women are in the spot where they're, they're not resilient enough to actually make the changes, right? Then we kind of get stuck. It's interesting. I was saying to a colleague the other day, I was like, right now I feel like women aren't resilient enough to make change, but then they're also not resilient enough to deal with the consequences of the lack of change right now. And it's really creating this like big cycle that's hard to get out of, right? It's like women are missing appointments because they can't manage their calendar, but then they also can't manage the consequences of missing those appointments, or they can't get to sleep because they're overwhelmed, but then they also can't deal with the lack of sleep and the impact that has on their overwhelm. I mean, I don't know if you have any great ideas on what the solution to that actually is, or what are those smaller tangible goals that we need to set for people so that they can build that resiliency.
Well, I think what you were just saying about a little while ago about just setting small goals, first of all, right? But also I don't just focus on the nighttime when it comes to sleep for people, right? It's not just nighttime. It's figuring out, okay, we need to work backwards. So what are the things that you're doing at night that are cutting into your bedtime? Where can we find that we can come up with shortcuts or routinize certain things in your life, whether it's meal prep, right? I've had so many patients that never thought about meal prep. I'm like, you know what, can we find an hour and a half on a Sunday just to go to the grill and grill up a bunch of meat or something, and just come up with little things that will pay off in spades, because once that becomes a routine, then we start finding other things. And then the things that are just not easy solutions, right? Like a boss that's creating a lot of issues, or a significant other who's not stepping up to the plate. That's when it's a bigger conversation of having to ask for help, what does that mean if you're asking for help too? Because there's that whole undercurrent too. Like if you're asking for help, it means that there's something wrong with you and you can't do it all because it looks like everyone else is completely competent on the outside. And that whole conversation too of letting go what doesn't have to be perfect and what does that mean?
I love that. Your book, Shelby, is called The Woman's Guide to Overcoming Insomnia. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on like some of those sex differences in what happens with sleep and why women do struggle more with sleep than men, and why this is something we should pay attention to. Yeah, what is going on there, and can you normalize some of that experience that maybe our women listeners are feeling?
So insomnia affects women significantly more than men. Now, why is that? There's a few different reasons for it. So I always think of it as biological, psychological, and then social. So when we think about it biologically, we have the same rates of insomnia in boys and girls up until they hit adolescence. That's once they hit adolescence, that's when the women have it more than men. And it's because of hormonal changes. So for a lot of women, right before they get their period, they tend to have either extreme insomnia or they're excessively sleepy. That's another issue that can happen. So tracking, it's one thing, and there are treatments around that can be done. Then pregnancy, a lot of times when women are trying to conceive, there can be sleep issues that are happening then, especially with some of the medications that are out there. Then when you're pregnant, it gets thrown off. Then you have the baby, it's thrown off. And then perimenopause with all the changes in estrogen and progesterone. That's another issue. So it's really cycles throughout the lifespan at different times, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything about it, right? There are things we can do. And then psychological. So women tend to have more anxiety and depression than men. So that can influence sleep. And social stressors, right? A lot of women are having babies later in life now that they're having to take care of young kids, but also they're aging parents. They're also working a job. They're taking care of 8 million things at once that they're on 24/7. So you put those three areas together and it's a firestorm for women as opposed to men a lot of times.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting because you labeled there like some major responsibilities that this kind of, I'll call this generation of women, but maybe future generations as well, are going to struggle with, right? It's that like, we've never really done this before where you like work full time and have young kids, but also have healthy-ish aging parents, right? Where if we go back a couple generations, they didn't have one of those things. Maybe two of them were not there, right? You maybe took care of your ailing parents, but you also had aging children, like meaning adult children, and maybe didn't work, right? Or there was some other combination of those things. And yet women still at that time probably struggled with insomnia more than men. But this, like, what did you call it? A firestorm?
Firestorm. Yeah.
Firestorm. I like that. Of all of those things coming in together, I think it's common for us to blame biology, right? And I think we blame biology a lot of the time because it feels like that would be that pill-like solution, right? I want HRT to help my sleep. I need a sleeping pill to help my sleep. I'm now menopausal, and so I need help with my sleep. When there's really those other parts of that Venn diagram, I love a good Venn diagram, that are influencing what is happening with sleep. And it's not just biology on its own.
It doesn't have to be. And there's some people, look, some people really do need HRT. Like there's those cases, but
100%.
with medications or whatever, but it's not, I think the thing is, it's not a one size fits all approach. And we need to think, we try to always do the behavioral stuff because that's really just the thing that's a good groundwork. But like we said, stress and anxiety, life demands, there's so many other things that HRT is not necessarily going to fit, or a pill is not necessarily going to fix, the stressors with parents calling at 2 a.m. because of various things happening and your kid coming in at 5 a.m. So we really have to think about it as on the person as a whole.
Is there, if you were going to rewrite your book, is there a chapter that you would add?
That's an excellent question. I really haven't thought of. I think I would probably write more about the demands like we're talking about right now, society demands, and where can you start reasonably, and the idea of, and also the wearable stuff, because that has, I wrote my book and it came out in 2019, all the wearable stuff too, and how that sometimes is worsening it for people, and that idea of perfection and being okay with things not being perfect. I think I'd write about all that stuff.
That's so cool, because those are very topical, all of those things. And you're right, like as we move online, you mentioned those big stressors, but there's also like the micro stressors of what women's lives look like right now, right? And I would say, like, you didn't delegate away making dinner if you bought all the ingredients, left the recipe out, and texted halfway through to make sure it was going okay, right? Like that's not actually delegation. And so along with some of these major areas of responsibility, women are still carrying around a lot of the micro responsibilities that maybe have been particularly associated with that gender role, right? For a long time, without putting those things down and being like, okay, I need to renegotiate my contract. If I'm going to work full time, I am not also going to check in on how that lasagna is heating up, right? Like, how do we separate from those pieces? But it's hard because that's not really being modeled that well for women, that they get to put that stuff down. And I would argue that women still are reinforcing a lot of that for other women, right?
Yeah.
Rather than modeling what it looks like to miss a parent-teacher interview because you're at work. And so I'd be curious, I do think that that's like furthering that conversation around perfectionism. It's like, well, what are we actually after here?
Exactly. Yeah, that was such an interesting, I've never been asked that. I think that's something I would think about more for my book, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And how can our listeners get connected with you? I think you put out great information on Instagram, which I'm definitely going to link that. Because I do think that learning about sleep is a little bit of an unlearning experience as well. And the more that you're exposed to good, solid, evidence-based information about behavior change, the more confident you will be that those changes will actually work. So when patients have never heard of that before, and I'm like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do a worry journal. They're like, oh God, Jordan, that's not going to work, right? When the research actually is that it will. It's that we just never talked about sleep medicine in this way.
Yeah. I usually ask people, I say, give me 2 weeks. Just commit to the stuff for 2 weeks. And then let's reevaluate that. And if I usually get buy-in when I ask for 2 weeks. So it's a good way.
Great strategy. I'm going to borrow that one.
Okay. So to find me, you can go to my Instagram, which is at sleep.shelby. I post a bunch of stuff there all the time. And then I have a website, which is like Dr. Shelbyharris.com. And you can email me through there. I'm very accessible. So you can find me there. And I have a private practice in just outside of New York City, where I see a lot of people over telehealth. Currently, it's mostly people in the tri-state area outside of New York because of licensure stuff, but they're changing all that soon. So hopefully in the next few months, I'll be able to see people from all over.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today, Shelby, and that we actually get to meet face to face instead of just over IG. Although I have to say that like the women that I connect with, it's amazing like how great your Instagram feed can be actually. Right? We do talk so negatively about social media because there is so much potential for it to be so negative. But I've met so many great healthcare women through social media, just by being open to like listening to other people's messaging and what have you. So I'm really grateful that you are in my circle of people, and that we had a chance to chat today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.